show of hands. Who here has never before been in the same room as a man who has spent half a year in space? Show me your hands if you've never been in a room with a man like that. Okay, another show of hands. Who's never before been in a room with a man who actually walked on the moon? That's just about everybody. So you're gonna enjoy this program tonight. It ought to be pretty interesting. Because what we have on stage with me, who we have on stage with me, are two American heroes, genuine American heroes. And what that means is they epitomize the definition of the word hero. They risked their lives for the sake of others, for the sake of America's standing in the world, for the sake of space exploration and all the benefits it's given us in science and in technology and creature comforts and consumer products. And of course, some of you are old enough to remember that it gave us Tang, right? In fact, we're not starting the interview yet, Doug and Charlie, but did either of you ever actually drink Tang in space?
We had Tang in Apollo 16 that was, we call it orange juice. And so it was not a real staple of our diet, but every day somebody had open a plastic bag and squeeze the orange juice inside. The most biggest problem we had with orange juice was John and I were getting ready to land on the moon.
This is John Young.
John Young, my commander in Apollo 16. And inside our spacesuit, Velcroed to our liquid-cooled garment, we had a gallon of orange juice. And that was going to be our refreshment out on the moon. And so we're floating around and waiting to get the go to land. And the valve for the orange juice came right up inside my helmet to here. And I was talking to John. We were floating around waiting to land. And all of a sudden, boop, a little bubble of orange juice started floating around in my helmet.
Doug, how about you?
And I'm telling you,
yes,
you didn't have strong enough lungs, and your tongue wasn't long enough to get it back in. And so they kept, and it hit you on the nose and just rise up. And I mean, it was a big mess. Finally, I said, John, I'm taking off my helmet. And I stuffed something in there and stopped the leak. But after that, we just put plain water in the bag.
You know, I never thought in anticipating this symposium, the first thing we'd talk about was the orange juice. Doug, how about you? You spent half a year in space, 2 different missions, Space Shuttle, International Space Station. Did you drink Tang?
Yes, we did. I think my mic's out as well, so. Is it working? Okay. We did have Tang. However, on the space station, our U.S. astronauts are prohibited from endorsing products, so we had to call it powdered orange drink. But we did have Tang on board the space station.
Okay, well, all the secrets are out now. Doug Wheelock, by the way, not just by the way, he went to space twice, and he was off this planet between those 2 missions for half a year. That included most of the time in the International Space Station. And an interesting little sidelight is that on one of his missions, he went up there in a Soyuz capsule, the Russian Soyuz capsule. So every astronaut who travels on Soyuz spends some time at the Yuri Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center in Star City. It's 75 or 80 miles out of Moscow.
Correct.
I've been there. It was wintertime, and I just want to say, if you were there in the wintertime, you earned your paycheck.
You did. You did.
Charlie Duke, those who are old enough to remember the 1969 Apollo 11 landing, the first landing on the moon, the first manned landing on the moon, you first heard him as the voice on Earth communicating with Apollo 11 during those last critical moments of touchdown, and we have a little clip from that little moment in history, talking with Buzz Aldrin.
60 seconds. Lights on. Down 2.5. Forward. Forward. Good. 40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. 4 forward. 4 forward, drifting to the right a little. 20, down a half. 30 seconds forward. Good. Ready? Contact light. Okay, engine stop. ACA at a descent. Nose control both autos. Descent engine command override off. Engine arm off. 413 is in. We copy you down, Eagle. We're sitting Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
Charlie, I was around. I was in Neil Armstrong's hometown that day with ABC, but it still gives me the chills. Does it still give you the chills?
It sure does. I was probably 2.5 years later, I flew to the moon, and I was more nervous and more tense in that landing than I was when I actually landed on the moon. There was just the tension was through the roof, and we'd had communication problems, and we had computer problems on the spacecraft, and then we had trajectory problems. So the things were just compounding. And so you can imagine as the tension built in mission control. And I call, you couldn't quite hear it in that transmission, but mission control called 60 seconds. And the propulsion guy said 60 seconds, and I transmitted 60 seconds. That meant he had 60 seconds to land on the moon. Oh, we were going to call him aboard. Wow. Then I called 30 seconds, and not on the ground. And 13 seconds later, you heard Buzz Aldrin say, contact, engine stop, and they're on the ground. Great relief in mission control, and Neil, as calm as he could be, heard his transmission, and I was so excited I couldn't even pronounce tranquility. It came out twang at first. But then I corrected myself and said, try to tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. And that was a true statement. We were holding our breath.
And they've worn blue flight jackets ever since.
Yeah, that's right.
Doug, you and I were talking about an hour ago, and I'm actually a little confused. Were we hearing you with Neil or with Buzz?
Oh, me?
Yeah. You're talking... Buzz was the lunar module pilot.
Yeah, Buzz was responding to my communications. Okay. And Neil was just focusing on landing the vehicle. And so it was Buzz's voice that said contact, engine stop, and then going through all of the power down procedures in the lunar module. And after that was all done, then Neil, this calm voice says, Houston, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed. And that's when I responded with that we're holding our breath. Yeah.
And Doug, you an hour ago, you were telling me about how Neil Armstrong was focused so much. Tell that
right,
story.
That was the last minute of the Apollo 11 approach. And our team, we're going back to the moon under Artemis, and which in Greek mythology, Artemis was the twin sister of Apollo, and also goddess of the moon. So our new program going back to the moon is called Artemis. And so what we did is we dug into the Apollo archives. I read all of your debriefings, Charlie, and we listened to all the transmissions. And I thought it was unusual that in that last minute, you heard two voices, Charlie and Buzz Aldrin, but you didn't hear Neil Armstrong, and he was the one landing. And I wanted to know, our team kind of researched that, and we looked back at Neil's debriefings, and it was because he was really task-saturated with the task at hand. He was taking input from Charlie, from Mission Control, and from Buzz as well. And so this was our first stepping stone in building, like CRM, we call it, cockpit resource management, where we can have a cadence inside of the cockpit to be able to help the commander and pilot overcome these visual illusions that they're facing on that final approach. So it really led to our our initial research into into what we could do better going back in Artemis. How can we learn from our Apollo crews to get back safely to the moon?
The three of us had a Zoom call about a week or so ago just to talk about the nuts and bolts of tonight's program. And I asked Charlie, just to confirm that I had it right, that he was 36 years old, 1972, but we won't reveal your age today. He was 36 years old, and I thought I was right, but I asked him, you were the youngest man to walk on the moon, weren't you? And he's kind of leaned forward into his computer and said, still am.
When Charlie came to Houston to work with our group, oh boy.
Hold it sort of this way, okay?
When Charlie first came to Houston to start working with us a couple of years ago, and he shared that story, and he said, "I still am, and we need to get back there." You know, it's been a real inspiration to our team to get back to the moon.
Well, it's really an honor working with you, Doug, and all of the guys and gals that go to the moon again. And so if through our experience, we can add just a little fragment of information that's going to be beneficial, I'm delighted to work with you.
But before we look ahead to our next trip to the moon, which you're an integral part of, I still want to look back a little, because what you guys did in both of your cases, very much uncharted territory, and to a degree, for every astronaut blasting off before now and in the future, it still is. I remember a saying that they're very fond of telling us at NASA, which is, the only thing we don't know is what we don't know. So it's still, there's a degree to which every launch and every mission is a gamble. And that's maybe a good place to start. When each of you was sitting on top of what were then the world's most powerful rockets, or to use the technical terms that they use at NASA, the biggest damn firecracker man ever built, what were you thinking? Were you thinking about the noble purpose of space exploration, or were you thinking, what the hell am I doing here, or something else?
My thoughts were, keep counting. Don't abort this mission. I've worked for 2.5 years to get to this point, and we're 2 hours away. Keep counting. And so they kept, in Apollo, you had 4-hour window every month to get airborne. So if you didn't get off in that 4 hours, it was an abort, and you waited another whole month. Well, in a month, you could break a leg, you could have an airplane crash, anything could happen, and you're out of luck. You're not going to get to go. So my thought was just keep counting, and they kept counting, and we went.
Doug, in your case, you took off in 2 different vehicles. You took off in the Space Shuttle, and you took off in a Soyuz, a Russian Soyuz capsule. In fact, was it actually a Soviet? Still in the Soviet days?
No, that was it was Russia then.
Okay,
so,
it was Russia.
We launched from Kazakhstan, yeah.
Either way, maybe your answer is different from one vehicle to another, but what about you? What do you remember thinking?
Well, actually, on the shuttle, I'd been a test pilot my whole life, and it took me 9 years in training till I got to my first flight. And I'm thinking, like, man, it's just taken so long to get to this launch pad. Like you, let's just keep counting, Charlie. And then once I got strapped into that rocket, that I thought, like, I hope I'm ready for this. I hope I had enough time for training. But what came back to my mind was John Young, the commander of Apollo 16, and Charlie's good friend, and our good friend of our astronaut office. He was the commander of the very first Space Shuttle mission with Bob Crippen, and it was Columbia. And I remember a quote. It's so famous, and I just love John for it. But it was expressed how I felt as well. It was a press conference just a couple of days before the launch, and we were launching the Space Shuttle first time with people on it. And so he was asked the question, Captain Young, when you're sitting on this rocket, are you just a little bit worried about the situation? He goes, let me tell you, when you're getting ready to strap into the world's most powerful liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen fueled rocket ever built, and they're getting ready to light the bottom of it, and you're not just a little bit worried, you don't fully understand the situation. So, and that's the way I was. I didn't fully understand the situation, but there is a trust that we build in our teams, in our crewmates that are on board with us, the people that have strapped us in, the people that have trained us. And so there is an inherent trust that we build through training, through really intensive training. And so those were my initial feelings. It's like, I didn't fully understand the situation, but I trusted our teams to get it right. So
There's a great quote, I know you guys know it, from John Glenn, when he was sitting in his capsule Friendship 7 atop an Atlas rocket, and he later said what he was thinking about was that he was sitting on top of 2 million parts, all built by the lowest bidder on a government contract. Right?
Right.
I thought about that too.
It wasn't cheap.
It wasn't cheap.
No.
But the bidders who lost would have cost even more.
Right.
Let's talk about the purpose of space exploration. And we'll start with you, Charlie, because you took it to the max. You went to the moon. What was it for? You know, when I talked earlier about the noble purpose of space exploration, what was the noble purpose in your mind?
To me, the purpose was to explore a heavenly body and learn the history of it, collect the samples and bring it back and do all the experiments on the moon. And so we would get an science understanding of the origins of the solar system and our nearest neighbor. And so understand what's out there. And through that, we learned a lot from technology, as you already mentioned. Things spread out across the technological landscape that we've all benefited here right now from everything that we did in space.
Doug, are you qualified to list a few of the things people might not know are products of the space program that we use and touch every day?
Sure, but let me add to Charlie's note. Charlie, you inspired generations of people, including me. So thank you for that. For the Apollo.
My pleasure. Thank
Apollo
you.
is so many experiments that we have going on the space station now. When I was up there in 2010 as the commander of the space station, and we had a little over 200 experiments going on the space station, studying our Earth, studying the human body, studying the way plants grow, and how we can reforest our areas of our nation, of our world that have been deforested, and so. Just tremendous science going on in space. Now, when you think about it, when I talk to children about this, it's like when you pour water out on the table or onto the floor, it immediately flattens into a puddle. Well, imagine that same water, like Charlie was talking about when that Tang got loose in his helmet, when you pour water out in space, it just forms into a sphere, like a world in itself. And it's because we've taken out the dimension of gravity. And things magical happen when you take gravity out of the equation. You can study cell growth. You can study pharmaceuticals that attack bad cells that are growing too fast. You can look at the growth of trees and how we can better understand the positioning of light and the positioning of our water resources to grow our crops and things like that. So it's really quite amazing the experiments we're doing in space. And it's all to advance science and our knowledge of ourselves and our planet. So absolutely.
And the Dustbuster.
The Dustbuster.
The Dustbuster was created, a different format, but it was created for the purpose of collecting dust on the moon. Polarized sunglasses came from the program, and all kinds of things, as I said, that are part of our everyday lives. Dustbuster's not part of mine, but it's really true. I want to go back and talk about your missions, and Doug, start with you. I mean, you went to space twice, whether on the way to space and back, or while you spent that long stretch in the space station. Were there exciting times? Were there frightening times? And what were your most memorable takeaways?
Yes, there was moments of routine, never boredom, but moments of routine where you felt like I got this down, and then a few minutes later the alarms go off, and so there's moments of terror and
Alarms
confusion.
going off because of what, for example?
So on my mission, my first shuttle mission, it was a 15-day mission, and we were moving one of the solar arrays to the outboard wing of the space station, and we positioned it out there, and then we were going to deploy a solar array. So the array started to deploy, and myself and Scott Parazinski, who was my spacewalking buddy, started heading back inside the airlock, and we heard the abort call that the solar array had snagged when it was deploying, and it started tearing the solar array in half. And so they aborted the deployment, and then the ensuing days of discussions where now we had an array that was just kind of flapping in the breeze, not deployed and not retracted, and we couldn't undock the space shuttle at that point to get back home. And so it's like, what are we going to do with this solar array? So we decided that we were going to build sutures and go outside and sew up this solar array. And it was a live charged array with the side power strip. It was carrying 210 amps of power into the mass canister. And we were going to go out and climb on this solar array and sew it up with metal tools, metal suits. And I'm thinking, like, is this, it was kind of a la Apollo 13, So we ended up doing this spacewalk, and I said, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. And so we made these sutures. Mission Control called us, and they said, look behind this panel, you're going to find some cable. Look behind this panel, you'll find some sheet metal. We're going to make cufflinks, and we're going to suture this solar array. We built 5 sutures, and we sewed up this solar array, and it worked. It was unbelievable. I went back, that was in 2007. In 2010, I went back as the station commander. The first thing I did was run to the window and look out, and there's those sutures just stretched out all nice and firm on the solar array. So there are moments like that where there are life-changing moments when the alarms go off. And that's what we train for. We train for the alarms going off, and there's never a dull moment when you're training, right, Charlie? We always try to induce malfunctions because we want our crews to be ready when the alarms go off. So
You should know that this guy, by the way, didn't just do that spacewalk. You did, I think, six, count them, 6 EVAs, spacewalk, extravehicular activity.
yeah.
Wow.
Charlie, kind of the same question to you. You went to the moon. What do you remember as the most exciting thing about that mission, about the scariest part, if there was one? And if there wasn't, then as he said, you're not normal. And your best takeaway?
Well, there were a couple of events. Anytime you light the engines, you're really alert. And so that article that video of, not video, but there we were in the Saturn V ready for liftoff. And I said, as I said, keep counting. And when the engine started, the thing started to vibrate from side to side. And I didn't remember anybody telling me it was supposed to shake that hard. And I said, man, there's something wrong with this thing. But we got liftoff, and John says we're go, and Mission Control says we're going. And I just didn't think it was going to make it. And but I'm real quiet on my side and not say anything because I'm not involved in the liftoff procedures and stuff. Well, in the procedures I was, but not in the flying of the vehicle. And so we shook our way first 2 minutes, and the Saturn V weighed 6.5 million pounds when it sat on the launch pad. And the engines, the 5 engines, produced 7.5 million pounds of thrust. And so they lit those engines in the vehicle 363 feet tall, and they're moving down here, and you get this vibration up at the top. And John's real calm, you go, and so I guess we're going. I found out later my heartbeat was about 140 at liftoff, and I said, well, what was John's? 75. So we made it, and then we started, we circled the Earth 1.5 times, and over Australia, we accelerated to escape velocity, and we were on our way to the moon. And a moment ago, you had a picture that we took of the Earth, and I'm looking out the window, and Mattingly's joining up with the command module to the lunar module, and very critical maneuver. And so as I'm watching, there's this picture that you see here, and there's the Earth floats into my window. We're about 16,000 miles away at this point, and it's a beautiful, there is this jewel of Earth just suspended in the blackness of space. And it was awesome and awe-inspiring. And so then we had some problems on the, not on the way, but when we got to the lunar orbit and we started to land, Mattingly reported a problem in a spacecraft that caused an abort of our landing. So we were 1 hour before landing, and you were 8 miles above the landing site, and they're about to tell you to come home. And you can imagine the disappointment that John and I had at that point. And so we didn't burn, and we circled, and Mission Control started looking at the problem, and we went around once, took 2 hours to get around the moon, and we're working on it, guys, and we went around again, and we're still working on it, guys, and we went around again, and well, right before we left, the loss of signal, they said, we haven't fixed it, but we know what's wrong, and here's the workaround, and you'll go for landing on the next rev. And so 6 hours behind schedule, we landed, and we got a full 3 days on the moon in with our car. And it was, everything went really well right after that. And here's a picture of John. This was out of John's window. You can see that mountain in the background is about 4 miles away, and it's called Stone Mountain. And a little crater on the white spot on the top, we drove the car up to that point on the second day of our stay. And the sky's black. The sun's always shining, and so you look up and you just see a black sky, just like daylight here. The stars are out there, but you can't see them because the sun's shining. And so there, and it's just this jet blackness of space. And from where we landed, the Earth was right overhead. So you look up in the helmet and you're looking at the top of your helmet. So I didn't see the Earth very much from the moon. And it we did a successful stay. We started right before we left. We were going to do the Moon Olympics. Alan Shepard started this, Julie, and he hit a golf ball up on the moon. And David Scott did a hammer feather deal, and they all hit the ground at the same time. That doesn't happen down here, but anyway, we were going to do the Moon Olympics, and 72 was the Olympics in August in Germany, and so we planned we were going to do the high jump, and we were going to do the broad jump, and so down here with all my gear on, I weighed 363 pounds. Up on the moon, 60 pounds. So we start to bounce, and I jumped, and when I did, I straightened up. Well, the center of gravity went backwards, and there I go over on my back. And that's really scary, because if that backpack breaks, I'm dead. And the backpack was a life support system. And so fear is not a bad emotion if you don't panic. And the thought occurred to me, roll right. And I rolled right and broke my fall on my right side. And my heart was pounding. John ran over and looked down and said, "That wasn't very smart, Charlie." Well, we set the high jump record, but that was the end of the Moon Olympics. And so we came home to a successful mission, and I learned a lesson, and I think all astronauts know this: don't do anything in space you hadn't practiced down here. Now, you just told me a story of something you didn't practice here, and you stitched it up, but that's very rare. You can get in trouble doing things in space that you haven't really thought about and practiced down here. So,
You know, your stories, both of your stories surprised me a little for this reason. When I was covering the space program, I saw a lot of the, call them the scripts for the missions. Almost every moment is planned ahead of time.
yeah.
So the fact that in your case, very important to improvise in your case just for the fun of it, for the Olympics, but you do get a chance to improvise and maybe, as you might put it, go off script.
Yeah. Well, we had a mission control. In our case, mission control was hustling us back in because we were running behind, and we had to get ready to lift off. And so doing this, we thought it was just no big deal, but it turned out to really be a big deal if you don't do it right. And
Tell the story. You mentioned driving around, as you put it, in the car, the moon rover, and we got to keep it short because there's still a lot of ground to cover. But the story of actually driving around for, I think, 3 days on the moon in the rover. Now, John Young was the driver. You were the navigator. He didn't have GPS.
We didn't have GPS. We had the sun was always in the east sky, so the shadows were always west. So we said that west is the shadow. So we drove our car down sun, and we rolled a gyro to 270 was the top. So that was our direction. And then I had a set of maps, and to go from point A to point B, I would tell John which direction to steer and how far we had to go. And it turned out to be really easy navigation up there. By the way, you can't get lost on the moon. Everywhere you go, you leave your tracks. So if you, how to get home, turn around and follow your tracks back. And so if it all was lost and you lost your navigation on the moon, you just follow your tracks back.
But you also said this thing skidded around a lot.
John was the driver, and
Always blaming the other guy.
and it was very sensitive steering. It had double front wheels steered and the rear wheel steered. It had very excellent traction, and the handle between the seats was the throttle and the brake, and pull left and right, and the wheels would turn. You see a good view of the. You're looking at near the screen. That's the rear end of the vehicle, and I'm in the right seat. And the front of the vehicle is the TV camera and the antenna, and we had a set of maps, as I said. And so John drove and I navigated, and I was also the travel guide, and because mission control doesn't have any TV as long as we're underway because the car is bouncing so much. And so John, we made every stop. We found every crater that we were supposed to find, and do all the experiments.
Back as the Space Shuttle program was winding up, I talked with Charlie Bolden. Charlie, these guys know him. He was the administrator of NASA for a while, a former astronaut himself, naval admiral, had all the credentials. But I asked him, why aren't we racing back to the moon? And I always loved what he said to me. He said, you know, whoever gets to the moon next, they're going to find that there are just 6 flags there that were planted by human hands, and they're all ours.
Yeah.
But now we are going back. And Doug, you are playing a part in that, in the Artemis program. And there's as he's going to tell, there's a Colorado connection. There's always been a Colorado connection, by the way, to the space program. Alan Shepard lived in Colorado for a while. John Glenn, Scott Carpenter, who was the second American to orbit the Earth, all lived in Colorado, maybe others I don't even know about. But now there's a Colorado connection in a different way. And will you talk about that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Greg. And I wanted to acknowledge my HLS leadership here. Back a few years ago, NASA formed the Human Landing System Program. It's headquartered at Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. And our leadership here, Corey Kerr, Christy Bertels, and Jeannie Lynch are here with us, listening in as well, because they're very...
Stand up if
you guys
you're...
stand up.
Stand up.
So this is our NASA HLS leadership that has really been instrumental in helping us with our program with HATS. So the first thing we looked at was how are we going to get back to the moon? And I'm chairing the joint test panel for the landing training and to develop the skills that we need. And so we connected with HATS, and we said, like, hey, they're flying helicopters up there. We talked to Charlie, we talked to Dave Scott, and said, like, hey, you guys need to fly helicopters. And so we needed to venture out to find, and General Rogers is here, the commander of oversight over the HATS program. And so
Where are you, General?
General Rogers, stand up, General.
Right there. I'm going to interrupt to say HAPS. That is I forget. HAPS, it's the military wing of the Eagle Vail Airport, and it stands for High Altitude Army Aviation Training Site, something like that?
Yes.
Okay.
Aviation training site, and here at high altitude helicopter. I'm a Army helicopter pilot, so this is right up my alley. And so I thought, because helicopters at high altitude are not they're pretty unwieldy and very kind of sluggish in control, and you have to manage your power, very much like what Charlie and John had to do on the Apollo all the Apollo landings, is be a manager of that energy and that power. And so we are connected now with HATS. We first came out in 2021. We did I'm going to embarrass Colonel Tucker, stand up as well. Colonel Tucker is the commander of HATS. So thank you.
Where Air National Guard units came in during the war in Afghanistan from all over the country, including places that had no higher elevation than 200 feet, for their pilots to train, thanks to the guidance of the Colorado Air National Guard. Army National.
Sorry.
Okay, you got to give our guy one mistake.
And for our Air Force brethren, the Army Air Corps is very proud of your service as well.
That's right.
So we connected with HATS. We went on an investigation. We went back into the Apollo archives. How are we going to do this to build this training strategy to go back to the moon? And so one of the things you saw in that last minute, it was I showed that last minute clip of the Apollo 11 approach because you don't hear Neil's voice. And so, and some of the things that came out of the debriefing were the lack of contrast on the moon and the visual illusions in distance estimation, closure estimation, and things like that. So we started looking at where can we practice this? And we're going to the lunar South Pole for Artemis. The Apollo missions were pretty much equatorial. The Descartes Highlands, and I think your mission, Charlie, was about 8,000 feet or 9,000 feet higher than the Apollo 11 Tranquility base.
Yeah.
So they're in the Highlands, and we're going to the South Pole, which is much different terrain there, undulating terrain with a series of connecting ridges. Sound familiar? Much like here in the mountains. And so this is, I'll let you watch this film. This is the Shackleton crater right in the middle there. And this is a kind of a time lapse of the low incidence angle of the sun that Charlie was talking about earlier. We're going to these connecting ridges with lots of big craters that have ice in them, water ice. And so we're going to the lunar South Pole. So we came out in 2021 to start evaluating the HATS course to see if this is something we could tie into our astronaut training to get back to the moon. And here we are 3 years later, and just like 3 weeks ago, right, Corey and Christy, we finally got approval for full funding to incorporate HATS training here in the mountains in Colorado into our Artemis training for our lunar landing skills. So we're now on General Rogers, if you'll have us, we'd like to be on contract with you through the rest of Artemis, if we could, to bring our folks up here. So our motto now is, we actually have the Artemis 2 crew is assigned. They are not landing on the moon. I've already sent Artemis 1 out around the moon. You might have seen it about a year and a half ago or so. And Artemis 2, the crew is assigned. There are 3 U.S. astronauts and 1 Canadian astronaut on that mission. All 3 U.S. astronauts are HATS graduates as well. And when our Artemis 3 crew, or our landing crews, get assigned, they'll be coming here for mastery level training in flight for lunar analog approaches. Also, I'm going to embarrass one more person, Ethan Jacobs. Please stand up. Ethan is our lead instructor pilot here at HATS, and so you're going to be seeing a lot more blue suits up here in the Vail Valley, and we're going to be present at the Eagle at the EGE airport here for the next several years. So we don't want to overstay our welcome, though, Scott. For you. Okay.
So the 64,000, you can barely buy an SUV for that. But the big question to both of you is, why are we going back?
I would say we're going back, taking 50 years, because NASA's budget was all used by the Space Shuttle and the space station, so we had no money to really mount another space program to the moon. But now there's a lot to learn going to the moon, South Pole. If there's ice up there, there's a how did it form, and is there? We think we can mine minerals up there. There's a lot of valuable tools and space. I see starting a space station at the South Pole that would be permanently manned, and I think it's something we can do and something we should do.
And Charlie was the youngest man to walk on the moon. He's still the youngest man to walk on the moon. I promised Charlie came and flew with us today at HATS, which was awesome. And we promised Charlie that we are going to put the next youngest person on the moon for him, so in his honor as well. So,
But Doug, what's your answer to that question? Why are we going back? How does the moon play a role in our deeper explorations into space?
So we want to eventually go to Mars, and so we're a lot of our science that we're doing, that we're going to also extend out to the moon and onto Mars, we're actually doing right now in orbit on the space station, and in our rendezvous and prox-ops operations in low Earth orbit. We're going to practice these things and build segments of space stations and outposts on the lunar surface and in lunar orbit as well, to eventually get to Mars. And I'd like to again from John Young, when we talked about why do we do things in low Earth orbit first before we get to the moon, before we go on to Mars. It's like in low Earth orbit you're about 3 hours from a can of beans, John used to say. And the moon, you're about 3 days from a can of beans, and Mars, you're a long way from a can of beans. And so it's a logical buildup for us. And the magic of it, Greg, is what we discover about, you'd mentioned earlier about the things that have been spin-offs, the things that we discovered just from exploring in space. You mentioned Tang, but Velcro, MRI machines, all these things that we've developed from that have been a result of research in space, and so
better fire insulation, better soundproofing, all kinds of things.
Absolutely.
Let me just interject. Our Apollo computer had 80K memory. My cell phone has 800,000 times the memory of our Apollo computer. And we got to the moon and did the job with 80K. So thanks for...
What I reminded our HATS folks as well, and Charlie and I talked about it today too, these guys didn't know they can make it. I mean, imagine, doing all this training and you try to imagine the things that could happen. How are you going to react to them? And we are truly on the shoulders of giants with our Apollo crews, because they went and they didn't even know they could do it, and they did it.
But do we even know that we can make it 2 years from now? Can you hear me again?
Yeah.
Okay. And I ask with respect to the question about risk. You know, there's a guy named Wayne Hale. He led the Space Shuttle program for NASA for many years. And once I was talking to him about the perils of one particular launch, and he looked at me and he said, you know, we are always this close to disaster. Now look at my fingers. He didn't have them 6 inches apart or 1 inch or even a fraction of an inch. He had them pressed together. We're always this close to disaster. And of course, there have been some devastating disasters in the program since it started. So have you found ways to reduce what is already tremendous risk?
So part of our training at HATS, we have a risk matrix. It's a 5x5 matrix. It's like likelihood and then consequence on the bottom, likelihood on the scale here. How likely is this malfunction or this problem this failure going to occur? That's on the left column. And then the consequence, and of course for us, the ultimate consequence is loss of our crew. Crashing a vehicle on the moon or a disaster on the way to the moon. And so we are squarely, when we develop all of our training, all of our research based on this risk matrix. And so we are very aware of the risk, and the only way to not have risk is to not fly in space. And so it's riddled with risk, and we try to waterfall and buy that risk down as best we can. So we are squarely in, when we go back to the moon, when Charlie went to the moon, we are squarely in column 5. We are in the danger of losing our crew, and so it's that high of a risk. And so, and we're trying to train our astronauts to be functional in that column 5. You can't really do that in a simulator. You can do that in a helicopter. You can do that in other avenues where your life is at risk. Taking care of your equipment, taking care of your crew, taking care of your machinery. And so that's why we train out in column 5 as well. That's why we're flying helicopters in the mountains here as well. So we are in tune with the risk matrix, and we know that there are risks out there, and we try to imagine what could possibly happen. And so the only way to do this, we're not on the moon. I've never been to the moon, so but we understand from our Apollo crew members that have passed this legacy to us, how a vehicle responds in lunar space, how a vehicle responds driving on the lunar surface. And so we can take these things and we can use advancements in technology and really buy down that risk, where we can be in a safe area, where we can train our crews to adapt and anticipate, so we can teach them those critical skills.
Of course, there are Americans, you guys have known it all your professional lives, who believe it's not worth the risk, who believe it's not worth the money, even though it's a minuscule part of our national budget. So if you're talking to those people, and you have to talk about the greater goals of space exploration, what do you say?
Well, we used to, still do, I get a lot of questions. Why did we spend so much money on the moon? We didn't spend a dime on the moon. It was all spent in the United States of America. And it had 400,000 people working towards a goal which was a national treasure today. And those 400,000 people got paid, and they supported the grocery stores and the filling stations and everybody else. And so the money spread out across the U.S. And for that investment, we got prestige, a position in the world technologically, and so many other ways. People respected us ever since for Apollo.
You know, Charlie, that's something I learned when covering the space program. Most people, at least with whom I had contact, did not understand, which was that NASA itself, the government agency, hardly owns a screwdriver.
Yeah.
I mean, these things were put together by these days, the Boeings and the SpaceXs and the Blue Origins, in the past, the McDonnell and Douglases, and, all the aviation companies and engineering companies.
B1,
and it's
B3,
exactly
audio,
what Charlie says.
audio,
These made jobs, and these were good for America. Does either of you follow events overseas closely enough to be able to tell me whether there's a chance that the seventh flag to be planted by human hands on the surface of the moon might be planted by the Chinese or the Russians or the Indians or somebody else? Do you have any idea?
I don't follow it that close, so I can't tell you. I know that we're working really hard on Artemis. It's an international program. It'll be our flag if we get there, whether we get on the first, second, or third. It's going to be a U.S. flag, and we ought to be proud of that. These guys are working hard and to give us a successful program, and we ought to all support the NASA effort. And so I'm doing what I can, and doing advice and let me tell you what we did, and don't do it this way, or whatever. Yeah.
Are lessons learned for every next mission from the immediate last mission?
Well, in Apollo, yeah, we had long debriefings after each mission, and we picked the brains of the crew and mission control. And NASA still today is a goal, not only goal-oriented, but team-oriented. Without mission control, Apollo would have been a disaster. They saved the day on every Apollo mission, and it was they are the unsung heroes of Apollo, with the men and women in mission control, and I really respect them.
Outside, before the program, we introduced Joanna Kerwin, and her dad was Capcom, as you were for Apollo 11,
Yeah.
for Apollo 13. So he knew full well, and Joanna still does, what you're talking about. Does either of you have one last story that you haven't already told about your adventures in space? Well, if you don't, I'm going to have to make it up.
I got a lot of things to say, but go ahead.
We want a good
Yeah,
story
yeah.
about John driving that car. I want to hear some. So mine was the moment that really kind of stands out to me because it was a model in teamwork. Charlie had mentioned mission control. On my long duration missions, I was on the space station for about 6 months, and about 1 month into the mission, it was actually a Saturday. It was July 31st, 2010. I remember it was 11:30 p.m. GMT. So we operate. So this is how these things set in your mind. But we had a critical failure on the space station at the time. But I thought I had made a critical mistake, and so on the space station we have a treadmill, and it's actually on the wall of one of the modules, and we have a harness that pulls us down onto the treadmill, and then you run on the treadmill. But before you get on it, you have to go into the main computer and turn off the smoke detector that's underneath this treadmill, and then turn on the treadmill, do your run, turn off the treadmill, and then turn the smoke detector back on. And so, very easy process. It takes just a couple of clicks on the computer. And I always loved doing my runs late at night because I was a little bit slower. I was up there with a couple of PhD scientists, and so I'm just a ham-fisted test pilot, So it took me a little bit longer to do all my science and things. So I usually would do my runs at night, off the clock, So I would just set up and do my runs. So this is a Saturday night, and it was about 11 o'clock. I turned off the smoke detector, turned on the treadmill, and went for a run on the treadmill, turned it off, turned the smoke detector back on. I turned out all the lights. All my crewmates were in bed already. And I was getting washed up, and the alarms, all of the alarms go off on the space station. Lights, like half the lights went out, I'm like, what in the world? And so I'm just silencing the alarms. And as soon as I silence the alarm, another one comes back up. I look at the mainframe computer, and it's just like, caution, warning, and I'm trying to read the lines of text, but it's scrolling in so fast that I'm like, and I turn around, and my crewmates are all there. We had 3 Russians and 3 Americans at that time. They looked at me and said, "Wheels, what did you do?" I was like, I just went for a run, I swear. And but for the longest time, I was. It turns out we had a critical failure on the station. Had nothing to do with the treadmill, but at the time, I thought, like, what have I done? Because the weightiness of not screwing up is pretty heavy on you, right, Charlie? I don't know if you felt that as well, but that's a very heavy burden because it's not lost on us that this is we're your astronauts, your taxpayers. This space station, the Artemis missions, it belongs to you. It's your space station, and so it belongs to the American people. And we're trying to be good stewards of this hardware. And so when those alarms went off, it's like, I'm done for, So, but the way we train with triage, and the bad things that could happen in space, a fire, a rapid decompression, and like a toxic release into the atmosphere. So I always tell the kids, it's like, so we think like, am I on fire? If the alarms go off, am I on fire? Can I breathe? Are my ears popping? And I was with a school just a couple of weeks ago, and they said, like, shouldn't you ask, can I breathe, before you ask the other two? I said, yeah, probably so. But when those alarms go off, and it took us, the space station shut down when it started to go into survival mode. It turns out it was a piece of hardware on the outside of the space station that failed, and it shut down half of our power, half of our lights, half of our science, half of our breathing air, half of our CO2 scrubbing. And so we were literally on life support. And it took us 16 days and 3 spacewalks to repair that. We replaced a pump module, got the space station back up and running. In that 16 days, I learned so much about teamwork and trust in your teammates, and it's go time, and nobody does it better than NASA when it's go time. So.
Charlie, the very same question to you. What story do you want to tell that you haven't told already?
On the way to the moon, we didn't have any showers or anything in Apollo, so you just sort of took everything off and rubbed down with a wet towel. And Mattingly was getting dressed after one of these exercises of washing up, and everything was there but his wedding ring. And his wedding ring had floated off in this spacecraft. It was in here somewhere, and but we couldn't find it. And this was on the second day out, and so he's looking, and on the way, so John and I land, and 3 days later we come back, and he's still looking for this wedding ring, and so on the way back we have a spacewalk, and we're about and Mattingly comes out, and he goes down to the back of the spacecraft to retrieve some film, and I float out, and I'm locked my feet in the hatch, and I'm monitoring this umbilicals. The Earth's down there about 180,000 miles away. The moon's about 50,000 miles over this way, and so I get back inside, and after collecting some film that he brought back. And then he floated out and started working on an experiment, and I'm looking at this through the hatch, and I'm down in what was called the lower equipment bay, and I get this glint of gold, and I look over, and there's his wedding ring floating out the door, and the spacecraft is outgassing, and so you have a rapid decompression, but then this stuff just keeps gassing out. So it floats out, and I wrecked for it, and I missed it. And so it took about a minute, I guess, for it to get out there, and it hit him on the back of the head. And it took a 180-degree bounce and came right back towards the hatch. And I don't, a minute or two later, it floated right in front of me, and I grabbed it. So awesome.
You know, I'm thinking when the ring hit him in the back of the head, his wife was behind it. You just casually threw out the phrase, I was floating around. What does that feel like to be floating?
You can't really control yourself. If you look at the first EVAs, extravehicular activities we had in Gemini, they floated out on long umbilicals, but they let go and the spacecraft, and so you can't pull yourself back in. You start putting a pressure, and it's going to a velocity vector is going to change you some direction, but not necessarily back towards the hatch. So it was very important to develop anchors and handholds and stuff like that, so you could do EVAs without getting stuck out there. Gemini 10, I guess it was, with Gene Cernan, that was almost a disaster because he was having such a tough time without any maneuvering units. Now it's different. You watch the space station, they don't let go. They're anchored at some point, and either on the end of the rover, the arm, or just handholds. So it's very important to maintain control of your body, and it's hard to do without some propulsion that works right.
One more question for me, and then we're going to open it up to all of you. You've both been in a position that very few human beings have ever been in from any country. In your case, Doug, you could see whole continents. In your case, you could see the whole world. So Doug and then Charlie, how does that change you, if at all? What are you thinking about when you're looking down at this little planet of ours?
Oh, it's just breathtaking. I still, I occasionally will have a dream about being back in space, but when I got back to Earth, I dreamed for months and months about being in space. And so when you look out at the planet, in low Earth orbit, where our space station is, we're essentially in free fall around the Earth. So we orbit the Earth once every 90 minutes or so. And so every 45 minutes, you get a sunrise or a sunset. So we get 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets every day on the space station, and each one more spectacular than the last. So it's just pretty amazing. But looking out at the Earth, when it's drenched by sunlight, like Charlie had mentioned, it's just like a beautiful blue sky day here. Only outside, when you look outside, it's just black, but the sun is just like washing over our planet. And you look at the planet, and the colors are so vibrant. It's like an explosion of color in the daylight. Just it's like a raging ball of life and color and motion. And then 45 minutes later, the sun goes down, or you're on the eclipse side of the Earth, and then you're thinking like just a black ball there. But no, it comes alive with light and motion, again with aurora, lightning strikes on the planet, fingers of lightning stretching out over half of a continent, and then just the mosaic of city lights and everything. It's just breathtaking. And I always thought to myself, when I was a kid, I dreamed about living on or traveling to another planet, and what would it be like to live on Mars or something, And I thought, had I been a kid on Mars or another, and looked out, was that me, Greg? Sorry about that. And was able to look out into the darkness of the universe, our solar system, and see this blue ball, this planet a raging ball of life in the vast empty sea of darkness, how much more vivid my dreams would be to go to that place, to go to that Earth. And so it's life-changing. It really is. It's the perspective is very spiritual and very life-changing for me. So,
Charlie, the same question. Looking from your trip to the moon?
Well, when the first view we had, we'd left Earth orbit and we were on our way to the moon, and the Mattingly was maneuvering the spacecraft, and the Earth floated out into my window. It's 16,000 miles away. It was almost a full circle of the Earth. And then we got used to seeing that. Then when we got to the moon, we came around from the backside, and we had Earthrise for the first time. And to be honest, my first thought, we're a long way from home. I hope this thing holds together. And so, but there's the Earth just suspended in the blackness of space. And when I became a Christian, I started reading the Bible. And in the Bible, there's 2 verses that describes exactly what I saw. And in one of the verses, it says, when God made the earth, he suspended it upon nothing. And that's what it looks like, suspended upon nothing. And then in another verse, it said, God sits enthroned above the circle of the earth. It's a circle, and it's a sphere. If you believe it's a flat earth, you're willfully ignorant.
I want to thank each of you for doing just a wonderful job. From our moderator, Greg, to Doug and Charlie. We're proud to have you in our valley. We're proud of this event. No matter what event we've ever had in the history of Vail, and I've been here since '64, we've not had one better than this. So. And James, you and your entire family should be so proud. Your father-in-law was before you. Garnsey and different people over the years did a wonderful job here. But this is our proudest moment tonight, in my opinion. So thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. And Charlie, thank you for letting me get that pheasant out in that wing when our pheasant hunt.
Thanks, Neil.
Megan, you have one?
What was it like coming home?
What was that question?
What was it like coming home?
For us, that was, we've gone 11 days, and it was a real celebration. And my boys Dottie was waiting for us, and we had a welcome. We landed in the Pacific, and it took a day steaming towards Honolulu to get close to an airport. And so it was a day or 2 later that we got home. And NASA had a big celebration and at Ellington Field, and it was just good to wrap your arms around your wife and your little boys, and having that feeling of being back. And we made it safely, and we contributed something and to the knowledge of mankind. So it's a great feeling of accomplishment.
Okay. Great question. And I had a chance to come back on the Space Shuttle and come back on the Russian Soyuz, which were completely different experiences mechanically coming back through the atmosphere. But the coming home part is like, I could not wait to see my family and be back on our beautiful planet, because there's nothing like this place out there. But the Space Shuttle coming back was actually pretty tame, a lot tamer probably than the Apollo coming back through the atmosphere, Charlie. But coming back through on the Space Shuttle was more like a kind of a braking maneuver, just a little bit of G, maybe 2 to 3 Gs up through the seat of your pants coming along, and then gently glide down onto the runway at Kennedy Space Center. We landed. Coming home on the Soyuz is like going over Niagara Falls in a barrel, only the barrel is on fire. So anyway.
Okay, we're in the back of the room here.
Hey, Charlie, did you get to bring a rock home?
We brought 213 pounds of rock back, but they wouldn't let us keep any. So I don't have any moon rocks, and none of the astronauts that I know have moon rocks. NASA promised they would give us one, and it took them 40 years to do it. But they gave us one, but we had to give it away to some museum, to some. I gave it to my prep school and Admiral Farragut Academy. And did I mention this earlier that that Alan Shepard graduated from Admiral Farragut Academy, and I graduated from Admiral Farragut Academy. So the only school in the United States that had 2 moonwalkers from it. Awesome. And so I gave mine to Farragut. That's awesome.
Hi, I'm back here. I was curious, with space travel always having been a government game, what is the impact now that private sector has gotten involved in space tourism? How do you see that affecting your future, or the future of the whole spacescape?
Go ahead.
I'll tackle that one. So great question, because our new lunar landers are being built by private industry. So SpaceX is building our first lander, and Blue Origin is building our second lander as well. And there'll be others that will come along. So we are completely and totally engaging with the commercial industrial base across our country. And it's creating this renaissance in startup from the big companies that we've heard of, that, the Boeings, the SpaceX, Northrop Grumman, and those, all the way down to the smallest startup companies, now have a chance to play in this mission back to the moon. So we are completely and totally engaging with our commercial partners. Now, there are some growing pains with that. I'm looking at my management here, and there's lots of growing pains because there's different philosophies in risk management and training and things like that. So, but we are overcoming those things, and it's really pretty fantastic to see, like, the magic of NASA being able to harness, like, the human spirit, and seeing our private industry being able to harness, like, innovation and creative thought. It's really quite amazing. It's like you're holding on to reins and just trying to keep the Artemis program going in the right direction, because there's so much energy now spread across all of our 50 states and all through our school systems, all the way up, down from the littlest ones in our STEM fields all the way up to our major universities. So it's pretty fantastic right now. So yeah, and a lot different way of doing business than we have in the past.
Okay, back to your left, Charlie and Doug and Greg. Back here, we have a younger voice asking a question.
So I sort of have 2 questions. What do you say about God when you're in space? And then what's your favorite space movies?
What do you say about God in space? I think.
What about, you can't see God, but let me start earlier. That I came back from the moon, and I was one of 12 men that had done that. And after the flight, I went to work on Space Shuttle, and I was at the top of my career at 36 years old, and I was empty. What am I going to do now? How do you top a flight to the moon? And so I struggled with that for about 4 years until I decided to leave NASA and took my eyes off the moon and put them on money. But our marriage, Dottie said, we're 61 years now, but it was on the rocks in 1972, 73. And so she was suicidal and was going to end it all. And some people came to our church and told about faith in God, and it can change your life. And she did, and I watched her change from sadness to joy. And shortly after that, 2 years and a half, I made the decision that what I really needed in life was not more money, not more prestige, not fame, but a relationship with the creator of the universe. And so that changed my life, and we began working for Jesus, if you will.
Dottie, stand up.
Dottie, thank you.
And your favorite space movie.
Charlie, do you have favorites? And that's steel. Am I on? Nope. I got a green light. Okay, there we go. That's Steele, right? So Steele's in the Civil Air Patrol, and he's visited with us about every Tuesday evening up at Hats. We have the Civil Air Patrol come as well. So I love Charlie's and Dottie's story, and I have nothing to add to that other than you've inspired me.
Yeah.
Of course, I have told you this earlier, that you've inspired my life as well. Favorite movie for me, I loved Apollo 13, and I kind of like The Martian. So Steele, what is your favorite space movie? That was awesome. Okay. So Steele, you're about the right age when we start sending rockets to Mars. So you in with us? We'll save you a desk at NASA. All right.
All right, we're over here.
What are your calorie requirements when you're in space? Are they less or more than Earth? And then how is the eating?
Well, Apollo was different than the space station. We've now got, they've got, I guess, ovens and hot food and regular food. Ours was mostly dehydrated, and we had a menu that we were able to select from, and each meal had like 4 plastic bags of 5 maybe of a soup, maybe a vegetable, pureed meat or whatever, and a dessert. And so you got to pick what it was, but you had to add water to it, like soup. I remember pea soup, add 8 ounces of hot water and wait 10 minutes. And so we had a water gun, and every time you pulled the trigger, it squirted out 1 ounce of water. And we put that in a bag, squeezed the trigger, shook it up, and let it go. And some guys, the other guys, I was the preparer most of the time, and so I'd pass it off, and they'd put it in their pocket so it wouldn't float off somewhere in a spacecraft. And the food in Apollo was not very good, but it was adequate. And we had a dietitian that wanted to make sure that our diet was standard. And I think we had like 3,000 calories or something like that. And so we ate pretty good, except on the moon, we didn't have any hot water. So we ate cold food. And to be honest, it wasn't very good. And we didn't eat very much. What gave us the energy was we Velcroed to the inside of our spacesuit. We had a gallon of water, and we had a high energy candy bar that came up inside the helmet on this side, and it was about as big as 3 fingers and about this long, and it had a lot of energy, and we ate all of that out on the lunar surface, and other times we weren't too hungry. I had one interesting experience. I was looking at our menu, and I was picking a command module menu, and I said, I'm from the South. I said, Rita, you don't have any grits on the moon on your menu. I said, no, we don't have any grits. I said, how about making me some grits? So she said, I'll try. And it took about 4 iterations, and after that, with hot water, they were really good.
On the space station. So all this 50 plus years of advancements in technology, we're eating the same food. So it sounds very familiar. But only we have hot water now, so we can inject hot water, and we do have it's kind of like a food warmer. It's like a suitcase, and you can stick your bags of food in there and close it, and set a couple of minutes on it and warm it up a little bit. But it's not very tasty. But yeah.
Nobody's really hungry.
Okay, we're right here.
Here's the microphone.
Right here.
This one's for Charlie. You told us about the Olympics that you had there on the moon. But I saw something filmed that I thought was probably just as crazy called the Grand Prix. Can you tell us about that? Where John Young drove off and you were filming?
John drove the rover, and I was the navigator, as I said earlier. And nobody on Earth had ever seen the rover, the whole rover, bouncing across the moon. It was just a TV camera mounted on the front of the rover, and you saw it bouncing around. So NASA decided to have the Grand Prix on Apollo 16, and I got off with the movie camera, and I said, okay, John, let her go. And so he drove off and you could see the rover bouncing across the moon. The rover down up on the moon only weighed 80 pounds. And so it bounced a lot, and the springiness of the wheels. And it was real squirrely. It had like driving on ice. Y'all up here know what I'm talking about. And so it'd spin out sometimes, and big rooster tail. And so we did all of this on about 5 minutes of movie, and we called it the Grand Prix. And so I think it really helped a lot to the engineers to see what it really was doing, bouncing across the moon. And that was about it. Yeah.
We have a young man back here.
Hi. I have 2 questions. Did you guys both do spacewalks?
Did we what?
Did we do spacewalks? Yes, I got a chance to, I didn't go to the moon, but I was on the space station, so floating around in low Earth orbit, and I got a chance to do 6 spacewalks. So they were usually about 7 hours long. I had one that was 8 hours and 2 minutes long. And so pretty fantastic being outside of in your own little spacecraft in space.
On Apollo, every time you go outside, you got a spacewalk. Except on the moon is gravity, so you can really walk. And but up in space, we did one on the way home. We had a spacewalk, and I've explained that to you. That hold on, and it was an adventure. Being out on the moon for the first time was, I'm on the moon. Finally, I'm on the moon, you know, and you get this enthusiasm, excitement about this place and the beauty of it and the wonder of it. And I never lost that. And so spacewalks were very exciting for us in Apollo.
And my second question is, were your spacewalk diapers comfy?
How did you hear about the spacewalk diapers? That's supposed to be a secret. We need to talk afterwards. Yeah, we're outside for 7 or 8 hours, so, okay, the secret's out. The astronauts wear diapers underneath their spacesuit, so, yeah.
We had a urine collection device, and we had a big diaper in Apollo. And fortunately, nobody ever had to use the diaper. But the urine collection device was used, and the only problem we had one time was we were about ready to lift off, and I gotta go, and I start to urinate, and this warm stream of urine went down my leg. My urine device had failed, and so. And that happened a lot in Apollo.
Well, we started with orange juice and we ended with urine. A Vail Symposium you will never forget. I would like to offer a personal reflection for just a minute, and that is this. I was very lucky. How many people ever went to the Kennedy Space Center and saw a launch? Oh, a lot of you.
Wow.
Well, you know what it feels like and sounds like and looks like. I got to see about 40. I saw a couple of your Apollos, not yours, but I saw a couple of others. And then I saw almost 40 Space Shuttle launches. And here's the thing. It never got old. You know, the sky was different every time, the weather was different, the trajectory of the launch was different. Of course, the crews were different, the missions were different. It never got old. And what it left me with was tremendous awe for the scientists and the engineers and the mathematicians and the technicians, and incredible awe for the courage of the astronauts and for the ingenuity of the whole program. And finally, what it left me with was a very strong sense of patriotism. For most of the time, as those rockets lifted into the air, I had tears. I was on television trying to talk, and I had tears in my eyes. And for that sense of patriotism, amongst all other things, I thank guys like you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Don't go away. Don't go away. Jane. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Greg Dobbs, astronauts Douglas Wheelock, and Charlie Duke.
Thank you so much.